Let's begin.
What's up, guys? This is Kashmir, and today we're going to take a look at some melodies that are super catchy, have become popular, and for us to think critically about why. What works really well about them? Why do they get stuck in our heads? I'm going to use a couple of songs that are big, like Happier, Marshmello, Shelter, Porter Robinson, Madeon, a song of my own, Power, and show you how each one of them has some similarities. Of course, there is no right answer for making a catchy melody, but there are some pitfalls to avoid and some tricks that often work. So let's take a look. So the first two tracks that we're going to look at are the melodies of Happier by Marshmello and Shelter by Madeon and Porter Robinson. I put them both in the same key of A minor to make them easier to look at. The first thing to notice about these, or for you guys to just know going into the analysis, is the pentatonic scale. So if you have a C major scale, it's going to follow all the white keys. The pentatonic scale is just like that, except it skips a couple. It skips the F and it skips the B. So what you wind up with is this. It's kind of an Asian sounding thing. A quick way to do it is just play all the black keys. And if we look at Happier, it's very pentatonic. It focuses on basically this C major chord. We do C, D, E, C, 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 G, E. These are almost all notes that you find in the C major chord. So there's a little bit of sadness at the end, and maybe that's sort of representative of the song as a whole, to be uplifting with a hint of sadness. But we're not here to really talk about the emotions of it. What makes it catchy, I think, is the pattern that it drives in your head. You have this rhythm of the C, and then almost the exact same melody the second time, but you do this jump. And then on the third time, you come back to the first one. So it's really a A, B, A, C kind of thing. The catchiness in here is a pattern that you see a lot with runs and jumps. And runs, I'm going to refer to, I stole this from the Pyramind guys, so shout out to you. But runs are consecutive notes. So here we have C, D, E. That's really natural to sing. The next bar does a G to E thing, and that's a big jump, which is surprising. It would be way more interesting to do that than, say, to do this. It's a lot less exciting than... So it gives you a lot of things that are very easy to sing, and then it gives you something surprising. And a good combination of these walks or runs and a jump makes things catchy in a lot of cases. Also giving people a lot of consistency. Like the fact that we hear the C being driven home to you 4 times in a row, it's really hard not to latch on to that. The melody doesn't try to take you in too many directions. It just gives you small variations of one central idea. The next thing, when we look at Shelter, it becomes even more apparent that these ideas carry over between songs. Again, it's almost all pentatonic. Actually, in this case, the melody is entirely pentatonic. We start out with a riff that has a big jump in it. The next one is the exact same riff, except it changes from the C to the D to match the G chord that we have under it. And then we do the same first riff again. So you have an A, B, A, and then a totally left field C thing here. That's more left field than the Happier one, but to be fair, the Happier one does introduce the B and gives you something, a feeling, by leaving the pentatonic scale that you hadn't heard before. So they kind of do the same thing on the fourth bar. They give you a sort of melodic fill, a new emotion that you hadn't gotten before. In the case of Shelter, to give you this seventh chord, this D7 chord is just a new place to take you. But putting the specifics aside, we're taking the listener to a new place on the fourth bar, and we're staying very familiar on bars 1 through 3. It's usually the same thing on 1 and 3, and 2 is a little bit of a variation from there. The jumps in the case of Shelter are more apparent, I would say. You have to go from the 6 to the 5 there, that's a big jump. It's a big jump, but it happens again and again. So it's not that difficult for your brain to wrap around. Maybe that's another lesson to take away from here. When you do those big jumps, know that you're doing something difficult for the listener. So to make those big jumps as consistent as possible will help them digest it. As far as the notes that are immediately adjacent to one another, like the D into the C and the D, E, C thing, that's very easy to digest for people. The most natural thing for people sing generally are going to be adjacent notes, like the ones you find here. So the big takeaways in Shelter and Happier are that they do a lot of notes that are right next to each other. You could call that a walk or a run. They have a few jumps that make your ears sort of perk up. And they give you an easy structure where you hear something, you hear a small variation of it, you hear the first thing that you heard, and on the fourth, we take you to a new place that makes you want the first thing again. It takes you to some other land before bringing you back to, in this case, the pentatonic scale with Happier, and in Shelter, the same thing, bringing you back to that F chord from a crazy seventh chord. So that is essentially what's going on there. Now we could take a look at a slightly more complicated example. This is Ocean Drive by Duke Dumont. So this melody is twice as long, but it's doing a lot of the same things. It has one melody, one motif that they establish in the beginning. That exact same motif happens on the third one. And on the second one, there's a slight variation of the first. So this is almost identical to the structure of the last two melodies that we heard. So here's our A. Here's our A variation, or B. Back to A. Now something totally left field. Because there's a lot of movement, a lot of fast notes happening on bars 1, 2, and 3, they make a smart decision here, which is to extend into longer notes for the fourth bar. This keeps you from being overloaded with too many notes and too much melody, and it makes you really want to return back to the original melody that you heard for the first 3 bars. So although this melody seems more complicated, it's in the pentatonic scale again, and it has the same structure of A, some variation of A, back to A, and some left field thing on the last bar. And honestly, I didn't even pick these songs for this reason. I picked these songs sort of at random, and they all turned out to have the same structure. So using the pentatonic scale turns out to be very effective, as you can see. But that's not to say that it's the only thing you can do. And this is where I'm going to look at a song of my own called Power that I did with Hardwell and try to break down what's effective about this melody. If you break down what's going on in this melody, you get this. This is the simple call and response of it. Right away, you're going to notice the symmetry here. If I take this line and put it up here with the A, it's almost identical, except for this note should be down here. But they're almost identical. This is not the pentatonic scale. We're using a lot of very minor sounding thing. When you hear the F going to the E, I would say that's a very minor thing. The A to the G sharp, that's a harmonic, very dark minor thing. So this is our main meat of the melody. But where it gets interesting is when you add this little fill. That fill, I think, makes it special. And that's what separates obvious, simple melodies from ones that stick in your head more, because they have something unexpected. But the truth is, the symmetry in here is really easy for anybody to understand before you add the fill. We have a call and a response. So when you're writing a melody, you can sort of think about this as being the meat of it. Whatever version of this first bar that you have, think about bringing that back on the third bar, or the second bar with some slight variation. If you create the space like we've done here, then you have the opportunity to do some fun things, to create some fills that will make the melody more interesting. But when you strip away this part, what you have is a melody very easy to digest. So you've created a very strong structure for yourself to have some fun and do some tricks to the listener's ear and not make them confused, because they're latching on with this very strong anchor of bars 1 and bars 3. So in total, the melody is if we had taken this section and decided to go up with it, it just wouldn't be as satisfying, because it doesn't feel like you've gotten something symmetrical. This first line starts at the A and takes you down to the G sharp. When this line is at the F, you want it to do the same thing. You want it to take you down also. When you look at your melodies, try to think of the internal symmetry that's going on. Once you establish the first bar, you've sort of created some rules for yourself. You can vary a little bit, but you want to come back and you want to reinforce the idea. In the case of Ocean Drive, Shelter, and Happier, they do the exact same notes, so they're really reinforcing them. In the case of Power, they're not the same notes, but they're the same intervals. So it's basically the same notes. The emotion is basically the same. You're giving somebody the same idea in a slightly new way. And that is often the key to melodies being memorable. All right, guys, so this has been my analysis of catchy melodies. There's no one right way to write them, but there are patterns. And hopefully by recognizing those patterns, it will help you make better melodies, and you can have some reference. I wish you guys the best of luck. I'm sure you'll make some hits, and make sure to send them to Dharma when you do so we can sign them. All right, it's been good chatting with you. I'll see you in the next lesson.